Thank you for doing this. Thanks to Cape Codders for Peace. In October 2003, Congressman Delahunt, you wisely voted against a bill to fund the wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq. And had your vote prevailed, those wars would have had to end, despite the wishes of the President and the Pentagon. You were not committing treason, or failing to support the troops, or endangering Americans. You were upholding the rule of law, representing your constituents, striving to bring those troops safely home, and reducing global animosity toward our country. And we applaud you for it. Refusing to fund an escalation, which is the upcoming vote, does not compel a war to end. It only maintains the war at the current level. So nonsensical claims about abandoning the troops become yet more nonsensical. Last December, Congressman, you and most of your colleagues voted for a massive budget for wars and the military. But many who voted yes said they would vote no on any escalation. An escalation that was opposed by a majority of Americans and Afghans and Pakistanis and people in nations around the globe. It was universally maintained in Washington that the vote on the escalation money would not come until now, the spring. So the fact that the escalation has predictably already begun cannot be treated as a fait accompli unless we're going to tell the American public that we were all played for a bunch of fools. Are there troops on their way or already arrived? Well, turn them around and bring them home. Last summer, Congressman, you and a majority of the Democrats in the House voted for an amendment to create an exit strategy for Afghanistan. Well, here is a simple fact that has been distorted by propaganda. You do not exit a war by escalating it. The President sent 21,000 more troops to Afghanistan last year, plus 5,000 more mercenaries and tens of thousands more contractors, all without so much as a by your leave to the first branch of our government, the United States Congress. We have at least 68,000 troops and 121,000 contractors or mercenaries now in place. And violence and deaths and misery escalated following the escalation of the troops. In fact, the President said that he sent those troops prior to developing any strategy for the war, almost as if sending the troops was an end in itself, a possibility that is almost too grotesque to contemplate, a possibility I would hate to have to explain to the parents of the soldiers who will die in the hell that will be the possible coming assault in Kandahar. The military has recorded 78 wounded and 22 dead from Massachusetts prior to this onslaught. A local official quoted in the Times of London this morning said, "Look what happened in Marja. The US controls the place by day, but the Taliban controls it by night. What is the point? And if you help the government, you will be murdered." Oh, but we escalated in Iraq in order to get out, right? Well, did we? We have 198,000 troops, mercenaries, and contractors in Iraq, and if you believe they are all coming home next year without Congress waking up from its slumber, well, I've got some yellow cake to sell you. Violence in Iraq is down, at least for the moment, for many reasons. One is simply the massive numbers of people killed, wounded, impoverished, and driven from their homes. Accomplishing that feat in Afghanistan would require several armies and what's left of our soul. Even pacifying Afghanistan, according to the plan, according to General Charles Krulak, retired 31st Commandant of the Marine Corps, would require several 100,000 troops. This is a war. This is not a war, but an occupation. When you attack in one place, the people disperse. When you hand out cash, it ends up being used to attack US troops. Several 100,000 troops may be a conservative estimate, and what if that was 20% of our force? General Petraeus' counterinsurgency manual says you have to spend 80% on civilian operations. We currently spend 6%. And over half of what we spend on reconstruction goes to the military to train the Afghan military and police. Violence is also down in Iraq because troops have in great measure withdrawn from urban areas. We saw this predictable cause and effect begin when violence in Basra dropped 90% because the British stopped patrolling Basra to control the violence. And the British were all quite surprised and amazed. And if you ask Iraqis, many will tell you that violence is down because a complete withdrawal has been promised and a date stated. Sending troops to Iraq has never done our country or the Iraqis any good. The same is true and will be true in Afghanistan. National Security Advisor James Jones says there is no guarantee that sending troops to Afghanistan would do any good and that they would not just be swallowed up. In Afghanistan, we are propping up and using a government of corrupt warlords and drug dealers. And our chief puppet has threatened to join the resistance against us, the Taliban. That's not because he's crazy or drugged, but because he hopes to win the support of the Afghan people. Replacing him with a different puppet wouldn't solve this problem. But I suspect that Americans are catching on to the outrage and hopelessness of pouring blood and treasure into an effort to fight the Taliban on behalf of a government that wants to join the Taliban and to call off the assault in Kandahar. Now, revenge is not a legal ground for war or a morally acceptable motivation for anything at all, but does revenge even make sense here on its own terms? The 9/11 hijackers were not from Afghanistan. Most of the planning of 9/11 was done in hotels and apartments in Germany and Spain and flight schools here, and would be again even if Al-Qaeda was permitted camps in Afghanistan. Paul Pillar, former CIA Deputy Chief for Counterterrorism, says that an Al-Qaeda base in Afghanistan would not significantly increase threats to the United States. Richard Holbrooke, President Obama's representative in Afghanistan, says that if the Taliban had control, it would likely not allow Al-Qaeda in anyway. And many observers treat with great skepticism the idea that a U.S. withdrawal would necessarily put the Taliban in control of Afghanistan. The Taliban is fueled by the occupation and would lose strength as the occupation went away. Our occupation, our bombing in Afghanistan is making us less safe by enraging people against our country. And no matter how awful Afghanistan will be when the United States military leaves, it will never have a chance at becoming a decent place to live during a foreign occupation, because occupations produce resistance. And the growing devastation will make the post-occupation struggle harder the longer the occupation goes on. Malalai Joya, a former member of the Afghan parliament expelled for her opposition, puts it this way, quote, "Some people say that if foreign troops leave, Afghanistan will descend into civil war. But what about the civil war and catastrophe of today? The longer this occupation continues, the worse the civil war will be." For much less money than the occupation requires, the United States could provide assistance to Afghans restoring their environment and agriculture, which is precisely what the current U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan advised the president to do. Our troops, who have plenty of bravery, could bravely clean up the cluster bombs out of the fields rather than dropping more. Illegal invasions and occupations damage the rule of law internationally, as well as antagonizing sympathetic populations, which is why terrorism has increased around the world during the global war on terrorism. And most importantly, even when it has an American face on it, there is simply nothing worse than war with which a war can be replaced. Speeding through the end. When a local resident in the United States is kidnapped or raped or murdered and the media latches onto it, we talk about the horror of it with friends and strangers. But these stories exist by the thousands and hundreds of thousands for the victims of our wars. They are real people with loved ones, and a single one of their stories properly communicated by our corporate media cartel would end all of our wars forever. Most of the people we kill with drones are innocent, and we now kill even more with night raids. General McChrystal says none of the people we've killed at checkpoints have been guilty of anything. The top killer of our own troops is suicide. You cannot fix this with better rules of engagement. You have to disengage. You cannot win an occupation. You can only end it. After 8 years of the current war, the people of Afghanistan are no better off. Their environment is being destroyed by war and resulting deforestation, and we're supposed to believe we have a moral responsibility to keep it going and to escalate it. If I break into your house and smash half your furniture, I do not have a moral responsibility to stay and spend the night. In fact, I have a moral responsibility to turn myself in to the police. We need to announce a withdrawal date and a handover of bases. We need to negotiate peace, as President Karzai wants to do, and we need to assist people in pursuing a livelihood through non-drug agriculture. Or at the very least, Congressman Delahunt We need you to vote no on a $33 billion escalation. I won't applaud for voting no, but I will jump up and yell and shout for doing something much more serious, and that is committing ahead of time to voting no and urging your colleagues to do the same and mobilizing 126 of them and being a national leader and being a star and needing a bigger room than this one. Because that's what's going to happen if you step out ahead and commit to voting no.
Yes, yes. Absolutely.
It's an unusual ask, but it is less than those soldiers are doing who refuse to go, than those activists are doing who routinely go to jail, than those whistleblowers are doing who have sacrificed their careers. We're asking you to put an exclamation point on your career, and we want to be there to help you and to broadcast the news that you're leading the effort for no votes. You've said that you want to follow the president because he is a thoughtful and intelligent man. We think that you are a thoughtful and intelligent man. We think that we elected you, I didn't, these people elected you to the first branch of our government, the one that takes up the first 60% of our Constitution, the one where our founders put every power they'd seen King George abuse. We don't care if the current president is thoughtful and intelligent. We want our Congress members to govern, to recognize the danger of leaving war powers in the hands of presidents, and to announce ahead of time and to lead. And others are already doing so, and 65 Congress members, including 8 from this state, voted to end this war entirely. We are wanting to stand against the troops. The chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee has already committed to voting no on behalf of the troops. We believe you can have an impact, whether the bill goes down or not, in building a caucus that will eventually end these wars, and in sending a signal to the world that will make it harder for our government to keep resisting peace negotiations. There came a time when Martin Luther King Jr. said, "My conscience leaves me no other choice." A time comes when silence is betrayal.